What's going on, guys? I'm Zach,
I'm Levi.
and welcome to Blitz and Gigs, episode 9.
All right, let's get into it. Last week was the NFL Draft Combine.
Had some big names, put some pretty big performances up on the board, had some bold statements from other guys who didn't quite live up to expectations. Where do you want to start with this?
Yeah, I mean, first things first, kind of to no one's surprise, some of the top candidates this year just did not choose to participate in the physical challenges at the Combine, including Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward, Ashton Jeanty. I feel like they have their positions kind of etched into the draft board at this point, and there's just no need to risk it.
Yeah, I agree. I think, you mentioned the quarterbacks. You see guys like Jalen Milroe chooses not to do the 40-yard dash. Everybody knows he's the fastest quarterback in the draft. He's pretty comparable to Lamar in that aspect, so why potentially hurt his draft stock by running a 40 that maybe teams might not have loved? I think,
right.
His throwing was the biggest question mark, so like a guy like him, as long as he puts out a good performance throwing the ball, I think, him skipping out on those other drills helps out his draft stock for sure. But I think one of the bigger stories of the Combine was the running backs.
Yeah, for sure. This has been kind of a resurgence for young running backs in this class in particular. I saw a stat that I think 17 out of 20 or 21 running backs that are projected like day 1 to 2 weighed in over 200 pounds, which is not necessarily a great thing. Like, that was Zeke Elliott's detriment, was the fact that he was not able to stay athletic at the size that he was at.
Eddie Lacy too.
Eddie Lacy as well, yeah, that's a great example. But I feel like this year is different. These guys are young, they're in shape, they're fast, they're running all under 4.5, and they're still incredibly big.
100%. There's twice as many, fast running backs this year compared to 2 years ago. So I think that they're, we had the discussion last week about, running backs and how their market kind of tapered off and how they're not worth as much as they used to be. And I think we're definitely seeing a resurgence here, You mentioned a lot of guys are being projected within the first couple rounds, and I think, taking a swing on a guy like Judkins out of Ohio State or Ollie Gordon out of Oklahoma State, if you're a team that maybe has like a decent RB1, like a Washington, a New York, a team that can just use some depth in that category, some explosiveness, I'd totally take a running back in round 2. I think that would, with this deep of a class, I think that would help for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it just showcases a huge overreaction from sports media about last year and the year prior when people were, spreading this narrative that running backs were just not worth a second contract. Around the time Tony Pollard got franchised by the Cowboys and Derrick Henry was on his way out of Tennessee, there was a real question mark around the future of the running back market, and nobody wants to pay them more than $10 million because, it's so easy for them to get hurt relative to any other position. They're a one-man position group basically. And, now at this point, from last year's dominant rushing performances from guys like Saquon and Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, it seems safe to pay running backs again, but it wasn't like, the 4-year effect that you would expect that it needs to, translate into the draft class. Like, I think these guys were in the pipeline, and I feel like it's kind of disrespectful to running backs as a whole for them to have last year said that they're not worth money. It's like we're looking ahead to next year's draft class and saying it's so deep in quarterbacks. Where was that talk last year about running backs?
Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, like Christian McCaffrey, one of the best running back seasons of all time last year, and was in the MVP discussion. And, you look at him this year and he just couldn't stay on the field. Like, his body betrayed him. He couldn't stay healthy. So I think that there's both aspects to look at here as far as paying a productive older running back and, rebuilding that running back room and starting young. But, yeah.
Yeah, and I would agree. What happened to CMC this year is an absolute tragedy, but you look at Saquon, who's in a near identical situation, goes to a winning team from a very losing team. The difference is that Saquon has incredible protection. Every hit that he takes, he chooses to take. And I think there's a stark contrast between those two guys, and I think it's why Saquon's still going to be very productive next year. Maybe not a 2,000-yard rushing season, but easily in that 1,400 range, which is top 3.
Right. Is there, a couple running backs besides Jeanty? Obviously, I think he's in a class of his own, but is there a couple running backs maybe, you look at a team like Dallas who's desperately in need of a running back. Like, is there a name that you're thinking about that maybe they pass in round 1 and go get a guy in round 2?
Obviously, Cam Scatabo has been turning heads, mostly for his commentary, but also his play has been incredible. Martinez for Miami has been really solid, but I mean, there's a lot of depth in this class. I don't think you need to go for the name or for the regular season record. There's so many options. I would love for Dallas. If G&T's available, I have very little doubt that we'll take him at pick 12, but I would almost rather go for a guy like T-Mac if he's there at receiver, build up our skill positions, and then sign Rico Dowdle to a $5 million 3-year deal, and pick up another running back in the 2nd or 3rd round. I have no issue with that. Get a split backfield, get a receiver 2 behind CD. There's a lot of money and a lot of picks to play around with here.
Do you think, you said Dallas is the 12th pick, right?
Yes, sir.
Is there maybe a chance that he gets picked before Dallas? Is there a team that maybe reaches on a running back?
I feel like Dallas is not the earliest team that needs a running back by any means, but I think there are bigger needs for almost every team before. Obviously, your skill positions and your halfbacks, they're going to be the flashier pick. So a team like the Giants, let's say, they took Malik Neighbors last year. Were they in a position to take a flashy new receiver 1? Probably not, realistically, but it panned out for them decent, and next year they can start to rebuild their interior, rebuild their line, whatever they need to do. It's just these guys cost a lot of money 3 to 4 years in, whereas if you build your trenches first, I feel like it's a lot easier to go and get your guys in free agency, your halfbacks and your receivers. So I don't really think it's the right move for anybody to take G&T before Dallas, but I wouldn't be shocked if it does happen.
Yeah, you make a great point. So you build up the trenches, you build up the skill position groups, and then the big position of quarterback is kind of just a plug and play. Like, you're able to put a game manager in there if you have such a good roster around him and have success. But I think one of the bigger debates in college football the last few years has been these star players, even dating back to like CMC when he was in college. They skip out on their bowl games in the sense of staying healthy for the draft, staying healthy for their NFL career. And now we're starting to see that bleed a little bit more into, like you mentioned, these star quarterbacks skipping out on the combine. Do you think that that's, a bad thing for the NFL? Is this the start of a bad trend where, these polarizing prospects are all of a sudden just not going to participate and let teams, guess as far as when to draft them? Because, the draft has been an integral part of the NFL for forever, and now it seems like more and more people aren't participating.
I mean, I think the one thing that a GM should be scared of is a combine riser, which we've seen with like John Ross before, who set the 40 record prior to Xavier Worthy. He set a 4.22 and just couldn't stay on the field, couldn't stay healthy, and was pretty unimpressive as a receiver when he was on the field. Xavier Worthy had kind of an underwhelming first regular season. His Super Bowl performance was incredible, and I think he's here to stay, but I think skipping out on the combine doesn't indicate a lot about a player's talent. We saw Braylon Allen have a few breakout games last year for the New York Jets, and he got skipped on until the 3rd or 4th round just because, he didn't want to participate in the combine. And I think a lot of talent is self-aware and is willing to opt out of that and say, you know what, whoever's willing to do the scouting and make me an offer that I like is going to be the team that deserves me. I'm going to go there and I'm going to win a lot of games. It's not what happened with the Jets, but Braylon Allen, he could find his rhythm there easily in the next few years. It's kind of a shock that he went as late as he did in a year when nobody wanted to pay a running back.
For sure. I think, so another story to come out of this combine is Isaiah Bond. So, I was a big Isaiah Bond fan the last couple of years. I thought he was a really solid college player for Bama and then for Texas last year. But, prior to running the 40, he said, I'm going to break the record. I'm going to run a 4.2, if not a 4.19, and gets on the field, and he was the 2nd fastest Texas receiver to run the 40. He wasn't even the fastest guy on his team. So what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, sounds a lot like Noah Lyles, man. What's going to happen to him when he raises Cheetah? But, yeah, I mean, we see the personalities who try to rise their stock just by their talk, prior to hitting the field. If you're not hitting the field and you're just saying it hypothetically, you have nothing to back it up, but at least you have no way of losing out on that bet. Yeah, I mean, I think he tried to make that jump to, a first round receiver, and it's just not realistic for him.
Yeah, for sure. It's really embarrassing, honestly, like when you talk a big game and then can't back it up for sure. But what does his draft position look like right now? I mean, was he maybe a round 2 guy before? Has it dropped? Where do you see him going?
I mean, I don't think it necessarily drops too far. If he were around 1 expectation and he just didn't deliver in the 40 for a speedster, then, you could easily see him falling a whole round. But I wouldn't necessarily say that he's, falling to a day 3 pick. Man, if he kept his mouth shut, it would not be as big a deal.
For sure.